Now, the demise of the Inca and the ascension of the conquistadors really was an end to a great deal of the living mysteries of South America and Peru in particular. But some of those ancient teachings kept on a simple basis like food, for instance. It turns out that Peru is home to 11 of the 33 plants that keep mankind from starvation. Chocolate, peanuts, most of the world's corn. Other mysteries were kept by the healers of the communities. The healers in some societies are called the witch doctors. The healers in some societies are called curanderos, the curers. What there were in indigenous society is someone who had basically a farmer's almanac in his head of when to plant, when to harvest, when the rivers were going to come up suddenly, when flooding would start, when would the ice melt, when things were going to happen. To be able to have that information, to be able to alert the tribe or the indigenous group, or the city, in the case of post-Inca society, this person had to have access to information that no one else had. The word we use today for these sorts of people is shaman. But it has become the term that we use, the nomenclature, to describe the person, man or woman, who understands the plants, understands communication with the plant and animal and invisible world that indigenous tribes really do depend on. They depend on it for their livelihood. If you're hunting for a living and you hunt in the wrong place, everybody starves. If you hunt and overlap with another tribe's or another group's hunting area, you have a conflict. People are going to die. So the shaman is the man or woman entrusted with the knowledge of how to communicate with the plant, animal, and invisible world. Now, for a lot of people, that seems like an odd supposition. What plant world? Well, let's take that to the real simplest example. I think, no. Indigenous peoples of Peru and Bolivia and elsewhere in South America believe that all matter has life, has will, has intention. If you question them on it, they'll simply say, yell at a tree every day for a month and the tree will die. Sing to the tree every day for a month and flowers will grow all over its leaves, its roots will come up, it'll set out new branches. That we know is true here. It's a form of communication. Now, can I do it? Can you do it? Possibly yes, possibly no. But there are the remnants of societies like the Incan culture, which depended very heavily on the San Pedro cactus. The San Pedro cactus allowed the user, in drinking the decoction of the cactus, allowed the user to access, to change the vibration of his body and mind, or her body and mind, to the point where it was moving at the speed of other species, the speed of a tree. Can you talk to a tree? Of course not. The tree doesn't have vocal cords. Can you communicate with a tree? Well, not really if it's moving at a certain speed and you're moving at a completely different speed. But if you can slow down or speed up to the point where you're at the same level as that tree or that stone or that flower or that vine, you suddenly have access to a world in which that vine, that stone, that tree lives. That's what the shaman had. That was the secret. In the mountains and on the coast, in Peru in particular, the San Pedro cactus was used. In northern Mexico, peyote was used and later adopted by the Apaches in the United States, and then the Kiowa, and then the Southern Utes and other tribes for their great ceremonies. In the jungle, throughout South America these days, a vine and a leaf decoction called ayahuasca is what's used to access those other worlds. Now, ayahuasca, it's being used by a lot of people around the world these days, and an awful lot of people are going to Peru to try it, to use it. Traditionally, that's not how it would have been used. A gringo wouldn't necessarily use the ayahuasca. A person with a problem would go to a healer. He would tell the healer, I've got a problem. The healer would drink the ayahuasca, access other realms of reality, other levels of reality, and come back with a solution to the person's problem. At its very simplest, here's an example. I had a teacher, Julio Herrera, for a long time, 25, almost 30 years. A man came up while I was visiting Julio years ago. A man came up the river, flying up the river in a canoe, and he said, Julio, I'm told you're the best shaman around here. You're the best curandero, you're the best ayahuasquero. Someone is wishing me ill. Someone's giving me the evil eye. Someone wants me hurt. Julio said, well, why? He said, because every time I sell my chickens, every time I sell my yucca, I get hurt. And then I can't work for weeks at a time. I have a broken leg or a broken arm. Will you drink ayahuasca and find out who's doing this to me so that I can get even with them? Julio laughed and said, yeah, relax. That night, Julio drank, I drank. The man didn't drink, because it's not his tradition. Julio went into his ayahuasca dream. He accessed some other levels, and he came back and he laughed. And he said, I gotta tell you, there's good news, there's bad news. What's the good news? Well, the good news is no one's doing you any harm. What's the bad news? He said, the bad news is, in my dream, I saw that every time you sell your crops or your chickens, you go to that bar in Herrera, a little fishing town nearby, and you go to that cantina with the 2 steps and get drunk. But the bottom step's broken. So when you come out and you're good and drunk, you fall on the broken step and you hurt yourself. So to solve your problem, you can do 2 things. You can stop drinking when you sell your chickens or your crops, or you can fix the damned step. So that's ayahuasca healing at its simplest. And ayahuasca healing goes further than that, because in Peru, just as in San Pedro healing is equally, in a place like Peru, things that to us seem very mysterious are very ordinary to them. To people like my mother-in-law or my late father-in-law, illness is simply seen as a physical symptom of a disturbance on another level of reality. The curandero or the shaman drinks the ayahuasca or the San Pedro. He accesses or she accesses that other level of reality, sees what's out of balance, and comes back and tells you, this is how to fix that. Don't drink after you sell your crops, or fix the darn stoop. Stop falling off it. Very simple. But in the case of cancer, or in the case of body lice that you can't get rid of with any normal treatment, or a fungus that's just eating away at a person's body, the curandero might not have experience with that disease at all. So the curandero would go up in his ayahuasca dream or San Pedro dream, and he would visit, essentially, somehow, kind of a plant market. And he would talk to plants, allies that he had, and ask them, what do I do for this person? How do I cure this? What's wrong that's causing this? And he might be given, or she might be given, a simple solution of, well, these plants in combination, boiled this way and used as a poultice for this many days, will take care of the symptom. The fungus will go away and stop eating their flesh. But the real problem is that person has built a small chakra, a small field, in an area that's poisoned with this fungus. So to solve the problem altogether, they're going to have to move where their field is to an area that doesn't contain that fungus, so they don't get it all over their feet and legs. Now, as simple as that sounds, let me show you. We think of ceremonies as complicated affairs. In a place like Peru, the entire ayahuasca ceremony is as simple as these 2 jars, a couple of cigarettes, and the ayahuasca medicine itself. No robes, no magic, no big altar with 100 stones or 1,000 crystals on it. You've got a medicine here that will protect you from enemies and negative forces if you decide to enter that world. This is called Kamalunga. And it's got elements from the jungle, the mountains, and the coast of Peru, which protects you from all negativity. A little perfume, which ayahuasca loves. Florida water. Once you've drunk the ayahuasca, 2 or 3 ounces, the curandero will turn off the lights and he will use this, a leaf bundle rattle, called a chicapa. And he'll sing. And the songs he sings are called Icaros. And they are songs to call spirits, his friendly spirits. Spirits that will help you find the healing you need and help him find the healing he needs to do for you, or she. And the whole Icaro might be as simple as ha-hia, ha-ya, 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 ha-ya. The sound of that chicapa is like a kite string. With that sound, and with his Icaro, the curandero tells you, fly, fly, little spirit. Go see what you need to see. He might tell someone else in the same ceremony with the same song. You are thinking in spiral thinking. You're obsessing about something. I can see it. Shh. Sit down. Take a time out for 5 minutes. You. Don't get caught in your own head. Move around. A very simple choo-choo-choo. At the end of a simple ceremony, and this is as complicated as it gets, in the morning, people are liable to go up to the curandero and say, it was so wonderful the way you came over and you worked on me and you massaged my head and my chakras and you helped me release some awful pain I've been living with my whole life. And the curandero is liable to laugh and say, you know, it's funny because I never left my little seat for all 3 hours of the ceremony. Each person in the ceremony is liable to say, but you worked on me, you worked on me, you worked on, and the answer was he did, or she did. But he didn't leave his physical space. He simply sent his spirit out to work on each person as they needed it. This is the kind of mystery that still exists in places like Peru. And it exists not just in indigenous villages, but it exists now in mestizo villages, in big cities like Iquitos, where people like my in-laws moved from the river, but they needed their curanderos, and their curanderos moved with them so they could keep telling them how they can make a living, which child is going to get sick in 3 months, and how to avoid the sickness that's going to come up. Or if a child's sick, how to cure them and how to fix them for next time around. What to them is daily life is to us often a huge, huge mystery. That's not where these stories end. Some of it gets to a point where, for most of us, it's very difficult to really believe. I take groups out to the jungle for the last 10 or 12 years. A couple of times a year. I lived in Peru for a while. It was fun. I couldn't afford it, but I'm still so in love with Peru, I wanted to go back. Julio was an extraordinary teacher and remained one until a couple of years ago. In about 2004, I had a woman get in touch with me who was dying of cancer. She had 4 or 5 weeks left to live. And I said, great, you're not coming on my trip. You know, that's the last thing I'm gonna do is take you out in the middle of the woods and have you, keel over. And I eventually talked to her doctors in Australia, and I talked to her boyfriend in Australia and her daughter in Australia. And all of them said, yep, Mom was really dying. Mom wants to go this way. and she's going to show up when the trip starts. So you either have to physically kick her, you know, to the curb, or you're going to take her out to the jungle, because that's her plan for some crazy reason. Well, it turned out she did show up, and she showed up with a boyfriend. And I said, okay, you don't look like you're dying, but I'm going to tell you what, we're going to make a deal. You can't die in the jungle. You can't die for 6 months after this jungle. And she laughed and said, I'm not going to make 6 days. I mean, I'm over. And I said, nope, we're going to make a deal right now, and you're going to live 6 months. And we're going to give you one more Christmas with your daughter. And that's about 8 months away. The woman laughed, and with that, she said, okay, I promise I'll live. We took her out to the jungle. Julio drank, she drank. She had an awful, awful time. She was sick all night. She was just retching and in physical pain from her cancer. It was kind of an awful situation. And in the morning, Julio said, well, you know, I see what's wrong with her. And that night, he had allowed me to see, working with his shikapa. During the evening of the ceremony, Julio had very graciously given me kind of a sideline sight. So he allowed me, as he moved his shikapa, to watch as his energy ran through the leaves into the woman's body. He just began moving things around. He simply began moving solid objects inside her around. Nonetheless, in the morning, after this woman's terrible discomfort at night, he said, Peter, you can't cure cancer with ayahuasca. It's a mix of hot and cold, and you need 2 hots or 2 colds. You can't. But I did go to a plant market, and I was told what to get her. So he sent his younger son, Jairo, who is now a curandero, out to find a remedy, a tree called a medio renaco, and to bring back a large amount, 15 or 20 pounds, of tree bark. With that tree bark, he cooked it down all day, and he took the essence and put it in aguardiente, cane liquor. The woman was a teetotaler now, and he said, you need to drink an ounce of this in the morning, an ounce of this in the afternoon, an ounce of this at night, until these 3 liters are gone. That will take care of your cancer. The woman laughed, she didn't drink, she hated the taste of it. She still did it. Now I want to tell you, as odd as it seems, because we're dealing with things that really don't make sense on this level. They make sense on every other level of reality, but not here, not now, where everything is solid, because things really aren't so solid. She drank it, and I was so happy that she got out of the jungle alive, and she took a boat with her boyfriend down towards Manaus, Brazil, from Iquitos. 6 months later, she called me to say, Peter, I still hate you. It was the most uncomfortable night of my life. I hate you. I hated the trip. I hated the mud. I hated pooping in the jungle floor, because I'm a lady. But I'm in northern Italy driving around on a moto right now, and I'm enjoying the mountains. I still hate you. Click. 6 months later, she called me again. Hello, Peter? Yes, yes. No, we're in the islands, Sardinias. Yes, so we're in Sardinia right now, and we're having the greatest time. I still hate you, I hated the trip, and you didn't do anything for me. 6 months later, and 6 months later, and 6 months later. This woman couldn't be killed. Julio's medicine had been so good. What Julio had done, moving her energy, moving her knots, moving her tightness, moving her pain around in her physical body, and then Julio's utilization of a tree that in another case might not work for a person's cancer, but the tree bark in this case worked just right for her. Now, I haven't heard from her the last couple of years. It's very possible that she's passed. But anybody who was due to die within 10, 12 days of me meeting them in 2004 or 5, who was still yelling at me for being a lousy tour guide in 2009, got more than their money's worth. That's what this medicine can do. And the reason it can do it is because that tree, the spirit of that tree told Julio that night, because I've never seen him use it on a cancer patient before. Today, I will work effectively on this woman to heal her. So we really are talking about spirits, live spirits who communicate. And we're talking about an ability of a human being to get outside of the rigid structure of his own body, to be able to get into a place where he is communicating with those other spirits. He didn't just take a stab in the dark. Julio was curing people for 50, 60 years on that river. Everybody on the river came up, and almost everybody got healing. Some people ignored it, some people didn't pay attention, and certainly Julio wasn't a saint, and so he had some off days, like every curandero and every brain surgeon has. We're not perfect, but when he was on his game, which is most of the time, his ability to utilize the medicine, the ayahuasca in his case, to be able to escape the physical boundaries of the body, to be able to communicate with spirits. They could be the spirits of the dead. They could be the spirits of ancestors from long ago. And as crazy as it sounds, you know, I once was asked by my father, who had been dead 20 years, to ask a question of my mother, who'd been dead 15 years, and they had a wonderful, loving relationship. And I said, Julio, I've got to go to the world of the dead. Does the world of the dead exist? Because I was supposed to ask, my father asked me to ask my mom, and Julio laughed and said, tomorrow night we're going to add some chiricsanango. Chiricsanango is a very well-known plant. It's in the Bromfelsia family, very close to the Brugmansias. And it's very difficult to control and very powerful and overwhelming. And he said, but to get to the world of the dead, you'll need this. The night we drank, with that as part of the admixture of the ayahuasca, I thought about my father, I thought about my mother, and I thought about the absurdity of the whole, why am I thinking a world of the dead? There is no world of the dead. I don't know if there's heaven, I don't know if there's hell, I don't know if there's anything after this or anything before this. And while I was thinking that, I suddenly started zooming through emptiness. Emptiness, 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 forever it seemed. And then suddenly I hit a wall, and I bounced off the wall, and I tried to get around it, above it, below it, on the side. It was the biggest wall. It was like gauze, 1,000,000 miles thick and high and wide. And there was no way in, around it, through it, or anything. And I thought, well, shoot, this is as far as I go. And then it suddenly occurred to me, maybe this, in the way I perceive it, is the wall for the world of the dead. Crazy as that sounds, it made sense at that time. And so I thought, okay, this is really embarrassing. But I began to silently shout out, Mom, Mom, are you there? Is this, I know I'm crazy, but are you there? And suddenly the gauze began to come together. And as it came together as the woman I knew as my mom. And she looked at me and said, you've got to stop calling me like this. You don't know how hard it is to come together in a shape that you could recognize as me. And I swear, if you had given me a pen, 1,000 pens, 1,000,000 pens, 1,000 pieces of paper, 1,000,000 pieces of paper, and all the time from the beginning of the world until that moment, and said, what will your mother say if you meet her 15 years after she dies? That would not have been on those papers. That simply wouldn't have been there. And in the end, that has become my litmus test for what's an hallucination and what's a vision. And in a case like that, where it's something so outside of anything I could have imagined, her coming together, 5 years, 10 years later, Arnold Schwarzenegger pulled the same trick in Predator. 10 years later. I saw that 10 years earlier. It had never been done on film. It was not something I could have imagined. It was not something I could have dreamt. It was not something I'd read in a book. It was not something someone told me. To me, that was the moment when I realized, not only do all things have life, all things, all matter, plastic chair in front of you, the plastic chair you're sitting on, the computer screen, the television screen you're watching was a tree. Just a few years ago, in terms of the length of time of the world, a few thousand years ago, that's what plastic is, that's what oil is. It's tree matter. It had life, it still has life. And in that moment I realized not only does everything have life and that life is accessible, but life as we know it probably doesn't stop when our body stops. Because I had a dead woman talking to me, telling me it was so hard to come together in a shape I could recognize as her. And it really blew my mind, but it made the point real clear and took it real home. The whole thing is bigger than all of us. The whole thing is much deeper than all of us. The whole thing is more broader. The center of the center is way down deep. The top of the top is bigger than we can imagine. Life is everywhere, even in death.